From space, this planet looks blue not because of the sky, not because of the land, but because of the ocean that covers 71% of everything you see from orbit. Scientists have spent centuries studying what lies beneath that surface. They named more than 30,000 species of fish, cataloged thousands of marine mammals, mapped migration routes that cross entire ocean basins. And for nearly 200 years, the Megalodon tooth sitting behind museum glass, the one the size of a human hand, belonged to an animal they had completely, fundamentally wrong. In 2025, a team of researchers sat down with 165 shark species and a single question. And the answer they found rewrote the Megalodon from scratch. Not a detail, not a footnote. The textbooks, the museum reconstructions, the films, all of it built on an assumption that was never as solid as it looked. If you enjoy drifting into the deep ocean and discovering what lies beneath, please consider liking and subscribing. It truly helps more than you know. Are you ready? Let's begin. The history of Megalodon reconstruction is a history of working with almost nothing. The Megalodon, formerly Otodus megalodon, is known almost entirely from its teeth. Sharks are cartilaginous fish. Their skeletons are made not of bone, but of cartilage, a tissue that does not fossilize well under most conditions. When a shark dies, the soft tissue decomposes, the cartilage dissolves or is consumed, and what remains is the teeth-dense, mineralized structures that resist decomposition and survive in the geological record for millions of years. The Megalodon left behind an extraordinary dental record. Thousands of teeth recovered from marine sediments on every continent except Antarctica, ranging in size from small juveniles, a few centimeters long, to the iconic large specimens that can exceed 18 centimeters in height. From these teeth, and from these teeth almost alone, science built its picture of what the animal looked like. The method used was logical given the available material. Researchers compared Megalodon teeth to those of the great white shark, the largest predatory shark alive today, and the most ecologically analogous living species that could be used as a reference for anatomical proportions. By measuring the ratio of tooth size to body length in great white sharks, and then applying that ratio to the much larger Megalodon teeth, researchers estimated Megalodon body lengths. The results suggested an animal of roughly 15 to 18 meters, a figure that became standard in the scientific literature and popular culture alike. The body form was then inferred by analogy. If the teeth were like a great white's teeth scaled up, then the body was probably like a great white's body scaled up. A massive, stocky, torpedo-shaped predator with a proportionally enormous head and the characteristic triangular cross-section of a great white in extreme enlargement. This model persisted because it was internally consistent, because the great white was the obvious reference, and because there was no obvious reason to question it. Megalodon teeth are functionally and structurally similar to great white teeth in many respects. Both are serrated, triangular, designed for cutting through large prey, and the analogy seemed reasonable. For nearly 200 years, the scaled-up great white became the canonical Megalodon, the image on museum walls, the monster in films, the creature in every popular science description. Its proportions were those of the great white, magnified. Its hunting behavior was extrapolated from the great white's hunting behavior, amplified. The Megalodon, in the popular imagination and in much of the scientific literature, was a great white shark that had been fed too well for too long. The 2025 study that dismantled this model did so not by finding new Megalodon fossils. There are no new Megalodon fossils of significance, but by interrogating the assumption at the base of the reconstruction. The assumption was that the great white shark is the appropriate reference for Megalodon body proportions. The study, led by researchers at University College London and published in the journal Paleontologia Electronica, examined the relationship between tooth dimensions and body proportions across 165 species of sharks. Not just the great white, but the full diversity of the living shark fauna, including species with very different body forms and ecological roles. What they found was that the relationship between tooth size and body length varies substantially across shark species, that different lineages have different proportional relationships between their dental dimensions and their overall body dimensions, and that assuming a single reference species produces systematically biased body length estimates. More specifically, the study found that when the Megalodon is placed in its correct phylogenetic context, when its closest relatives are used as references rather than the superficially similar great white, the body proportion estimates change dramatically. The Megalodon belongs to the family Otodontidae, an extinct group of sharks that also includes Otodus obliquus and several other large Cenozoic species. The living shark whose dental and body proportions most closely match those of Otodontidae is not the great white shark. It is the lemon shark, a species with a more elongated, slender body form than the great white, a shallower body depth relative to length, and a different overall silhouette. When lemon shark proportions are used as the reference for Megalodon reconstruction, the resulting animal is dramatically different from the traditional image. Longer, slimmer, with a proportionally smaller head and a body that extends further behind the dorsal fin than the classic great white-based reconstruction. The revised body length estimates are also larger, potentially substantially larger. The traditional great white-based reconstruction produced maximum lengths of roughly 15 to 18 meters. The new lemon shark-based reconstruction, applied to the largest known Megalodon teeth, produces estimates that could approach 24 meters or beyond under some assumptions. This is not a minor revision. It is a fundamental reconsideration of what the Megalodon was. Not a stocky, compact killing machine, analogous to a great white in extreme scale, but an elongated, fast-moving predator of a different shape entirely, one whose hunting mechanics, hydrodynamics, and ecological role may all need to be reconsidered in light of the new body plan. The implications of this revision extend through every aspect of Megalodon biology that was previously inferred from the scaled-up great white model. If the body was slimmer and more elongated, the animal's hydrodynamics were different. It would have moved through the water differently, achieved different speeds relative to its body length, and generated different amounts of drag. The muscle mass distribution would have been different, affecting the power available for acceleration and sustained swimming. The center of gravity and buoyancy distribution would have been different, affecting how the animal maneuvered. None of these hydrodynamic and biomechanical properties can be directly measured from fossilized teeth, but they can be estimated from the revised body proportions, and the estimates produce a megalodon that is, in many ways, more capable, and in some ways differently capable than the traditional reconstruction suggested. The skull and jaw proportions are among the most consequential aspects of the revision. In the traditional great white-based reconstruction, the megalodon had a proportionally enormous head, wide, deep, and capable of an extraordinary gape. The jaw mechanics of the scaled-up great white implied an animal that could open its jaws wide enough to engulf an entire modern cetacean in a single bite, and whose bite force, estimated by scaling the great white's bite force up by the cube of the linear scaling factor, was in the range of tens of thousands of newtons. These figures became part of the popular megalodon narrative. The animal so large it could bite a great white shark in half, so powerful it could crush the skull of a whale with a single bite. In the revised reconstruction, the head is proportionally smaller. The jaw mechanics are different. The bite force estimates change. The animal remains extraordinarily powerful by any reasonable standard, but the specific mechanical capabilities that the traditional model implied and that popular culture amplified into legend require revision. The dental evidence itself, when examined carefully, provides some support for the revised body plan. Megalodon teeth are large, but they are not proportionally as deep as tall as great white shark teeth when tooth height is expressed as a fraction of the total tooth row length. The megalodon's tooth battery appears to have been adapted for a slightly different mechanical function than the great white's one that is more consistent with the elongated body form of the new reconstruction than with the stocky, great white-like body of the traditional model. The serrations on megalodon teeth are also finer, relative to tooth size, than those of the great white, a characteristic more consistent with cutting through the flesh of large prey in efficient, sustained feeding than with the bone-crushing bites implied by the maximum force estimates of the traditional reconstruction. None of this means the traditional megalodon reconstruction was unreasonable given what was known at the time. It was the best inference available from the available evidence, using the most obvious reference. What the 2025 study demonstrates is that science's best inference was wrong, that the obvious reference was the wrong reference, and that a more careful examination of the full range of shark diversity produces a different and better supported picture of what this animal looked like. This is how science is supposed to work. The evidence changes, the inference changes, the picture changes. The megalodon has not changed. It has been dead for 3.6 million years. What has changed is our ability to reconstruct it accurately, and the picture that ability is now producing is of an animal that is, in several important respects, more impressive than the one it is replacing. Longer, slimmer, shaped not like the dominant predator of popular imagination, but like something built for sustained, efficient pursuit over long distances, an architecture that, when combined with the other biological features that the fossil record preserves suggests a hunting strategy and ecological role that the traditional reconstruction did not imply. What those features are and what they reveal about how the Megalodon actually lived is the territory that the next part of this story explores. The revision of the Megalodon's body plan also raises questions about how we interpret the fossil sites where Megalodon remains are concentrated. Megalodon teeth are found across an enormous geographic range, from the Atlantic and Pacific coasts of North America to the Mediterranean, from the coastal shelf deposits of Australia to the volcanic islands of the Pacific. This global distribution reflects the Megalodon's extraordinary breadth of habitat use. It was a cosmopolitan species, found in warm and temperate marine environments on every major coastline during its evolutionary span. The teeth are found in a variety of depositional environments: shallow coastal lagoons, offshore shelf sediments, near-shore reef environments, and the size distribution of teeth from different sites varies in ways that paleontologists have begun to interpret as reflecting different life history, stages, and habitat uses at different ages. Smaller Megalodon teeth, those of juveniles and subadults, are disproportionately found in certain coastal environments that have been interpreted as nursery areas. The idea is that female megalodons gave birth in shallow, warm, productive coastal waters where newborns and juveniles could find prey appropriate to their size, and where the shallow depth provided some protection from the open ocean predators that a juvenile megalodon might not yet be large enough to dominate. The nursery hypothesis for Megalodon is supported not just by the distribution of small teeth in certain sites, but by the remarkable size of Megalodon neonates, a finding that itself emerged from careful analysis of the tooth. Record: growth analysis of teeth from nursery sites indicates that Megalodon newborns were already approximately 2 meters in length, roughly the size of an adult great white shark. The result is startling. A newborn Megalodon was already larger than most adult sharks alive today. This extreme neonatal size constrained the mother's body size, limited the number of offspring per reproductive event, and required nursery environments with abundant prey appropriate to juvenile size. Juveniles were still vulnerable to larger marine predators of the Miocene Ocean until they grew beyond a threshold size, a life history stage that shaped the Megalodon's relationship to coastal habitats across its entire geographic range. Understanding the Megalodon's biology in this fuller sense, not just as an individual predator but as a species with a life history, with neonates and juveniles and adults, with nursery grounds and feeding ranges and migratory patterns, requires going beyond the teeth themselves to the ecosystems in which those teeth were deposited. And the ecosystems of the Miocene and Pliocene oceans, in which the Megalodon spent its entire evolutionary history, were fundamentally different from the oceans of today in ways that are essential to understanding both how the Megalodon lived and why it eventually did not. Megalodon teeth also carry direct chemical evidence of the animal's physiology, evidence that has only recently become accessible through isotopic analysis techniques developed in the past 2 decades. The zinc isotope composition of tooth enamel reflects the trophic position of the animal that produced it. Predators at higher trophic levels have characteristic zinc isotope signatures that differ from those of prey species, because isotopic fractionation occurs at each step of the food chain. Analysis of Megalodon tooth enamel for zinc isotopes has confirmed that the Megalodon occupied an extremely high trophic position as expected for an apex predator, but has also revealed that its trophic signature was more variable than that of a dedicated specialist. The zinc isotope data suggest that the Megalodon was not a whale specialist in the strict sense, consuming primarily large baleen whales to the exclusion of other prey. Instead, it appears to have been a flexible, opportunistic predator that adjusted its diet to the available prey in its environment, consuming large marine mammals when they were available, but also taking smaller cetaceans, sea turtles, large fish, and other prey when conditions favored doing so. This dietary flexibility, documented chemically from the enamel of fossilized teeth, is more consistent with the elongated, pursuit-capable body form of the revised reconstruction than with the ambush predator model that the scaled-up great white implied. The oxygen isotope composition of Megalodon teeth tells a different story, one about the animal's thermal physiology. The ratio of oxygen 1:8 to oxygen 16 inches tooth enamel is sensitive to the body temperature of the animal at the time the enamel was formed. And by comparing the oxygen isotope values in Megalodon teeth to those of co-occurring cold-blooded marine species whose body temperature tracked the ambient water temperature, researchers can estimate the degree to which the Megalodon maintained a body temperature above that of the surrounding water. The results are consistent with a degree of endothermic internal heat generation that is intermediate between the fully ectothermic state of most sharks and the full endothermy of marine mammals. The Megalodon, in other words, was partially warm-blooded, capable of maintaining its body temperature somewhat above ambient water temperature through metabolic heat generation, in the way that modern lamnid sharks, including the great white and the shortfin mako, can do. This partial endothermy has implications that extend through every aspect of Megalodon biology. A warmer body means faster enzymatic reactions, faster nerve conduction, faster muscle contraction, and generally higher performance across all physiological systems. A Megalodon with partial endothermy could sustain higher swimming speeds, react faster to prey movements, and maintain active pursuit over longer distances than a fully ectothermic shark of equivalent size. It could also range into cooler waters than a fully cold-blooded predator following prey into higher latitudes without the performance penalty that cold water would impose on an ectotherm. The global distribution of Megalodon teeth, which extends into waters that would have been relatively cool even during the warm Miocene, is consistent with an animal that was not thermally constrained to tropical and subtropical environments. Partial endothermy would have enabled the Megalodon to exploit the full geographic range of the large marine mammal prey that supported its enormous energetic requirements. But partial endothermy also carries a cost. Maintaining an elevated body temperature requires a substantial continuous energy input, more food, more consistently than a cold-blooded predator of equivalent size would require. The Megalodon's estimated caloric needs, calculated from its body size, and the metabolic rate implied by partial endothermy were staggering. Estimates in the range of tens of thousands of calories per day for a fully grown adult. Meeting this demand required access to abundant, high-calorie prey during the Miocene and early Pliocene. That prey existed in the form of a diverse and abundant fauna of large marine mammals distributed across the warm water and temperate ocean environments where the Megalodon was most common. The relationship between the Megalodon's energetic demands and the abundance of this prey is central to understanding both how the animal thrived and what ultimately ended it. The Megalodon did not appear suddenly in the fossil record. It emerged from a lineage, the Otodontidae, that had been producing large-bodied sharks for tens of millions of years before the Megalodon reached its full size. The evolutionary history of this lineage traces back to the Cretaceous period, more than 66 million years ago, when the ancestors of the odontid sharks were already producing teeth structurally similar to those that would eventually become the Megalodon's defining characteristic. Over the following tens of millions of years, the ododontid lineage gradually increased in body size, not in a single dramatic step, but through the slow accumulation of size-favoring adaptations across many successive species, each slightly larger than its predecessor. By the time Otodus megalodon emerged as a distinct species in the early Miocene, approximately 23 million years ago, it was the product of a size-increasing trend that had been running for far longer than the megalodon's own evolutionary lifespan. The world the megalodon entered at its origin was profoundly different from the modern ocean. The Miocene epoch, which began approximately 23 million years ago and ended 5.3 million years ago, was a warmer period than today. Global average temperatures were several degrees higher than the modern baseline. Sea levels were higher, and the configuration of the continents was different in ways that affected the circulation of ocean currents and the distribution of marine productivity. The Tethys Sea, a shallow body of water that had once stretched across what is now the Mediterranean region and into Central Asia, was in the process of closing as the African and Eurasian plates continued their collision. And its closure was progressively restricting the circulation of warm water between the Atlantic and Pacific. The Arctic was ice-free, or nearly so, and the polar regions were significantly warmer than today, supporting marine ecosystems that no longer exist in those latitudes. In this warmer ocean, the marine mammal fauna that the megalodon exploited for food was extraordinarily diverse and, by modern standards, enormous. The Miocene was the golden age of cetacean diversity, the lineages that would eventually produce modern whales, dolphins, and porpoises were branching and diversifying rapidly, producing an array of species that included many giants no longer present in today's ocean. Among the most significant of these from the megalodon's perspective were the large raptorial sperm whales of the genus Livyatan and related genera toothed whales with enormous teeth and presumably strong bite forces, occupying an ecological role similar to that of modern sperm whales, but at potentially larger body sizes. Livyatan melvillei, the best-known species, had teeth exceeding 36 centimeters in length, the largest functional teeth of any known animal, and is estimated to have reached body lengths of 13 to 17 meters. It was not prey. It was competition. The coexistence of the megalodon and Livyatan in the Miocene Ocean represents one of the most dramatic ecological configurations in the history of life. two enormous apex predators, both pursuing large marine mammals, both capable of taking prey that no other predator of the time could have handled, both present in the same geographic regions and potentially overlapping in their prey preferences. Whether the two species competed directly, partitioned their prey by size or location, or avoided each other behaviorally, is not known from the fossil record. What is known is that both existed simultaneously, in significant numbers, for several million years, and that the ocean of the Miocene was productive enough to support both. The prey base must have been vast. The marine mammal fauna of the Miocene was diverse, abundant, and distributed across warm water ocean regions worldwide, and the predators that exploited it had evolved to match its scale. The baleen whale lineages present during the Megalodon's era also differed from those of today in ways that are relevant to the Megalodon's diet. The giant baleen whales of the modern ocean, the blue whale, the fin whale, the bowhead, are, in body size, products of relatively recent evolution, with the extreme gigantism of modern mysticetes having developed primarily in the last few million years in response to the expansion of polar krill production that accompanied the cooling of the polar oceans. During the Miocene, the baleen whales were more diverse in body size, but on average smaller than today's giants, abundant, nutritionally dense, and more evenly distributed across ocean latitudes because the absence of extreme polar cooling meant the krill aggregations that drive modern mysticete behavior to the poles were less pronounced. For the Megalodon, this meant prey that was available across a broad geographic range rather than concentrated at polar latitudes that the Megalodon's warm water preference would have made it difficult to exploit in any case. The fossil record of Megalodon attacks on other large marine animals provides direct evidence of the predator's capabilities and feeding behavior. Whale bones with Megalodon tooth marks have been recovered from Miocene and Pliocene deposits. Worldwide bones scored by the characteristic serrations of Megalodon teeth, bones with embedded Megalodon tooth fragments, bones showing healed scarring from attacks that the whale survived, and unhealed damage that indicates the attack was fatal. The pattern of bite marks on whale bones is not random. The Megalodon appears to have targeted the flipper bases and tail flukes of large whales, the locomotor appendages in a manner consistent with an immobilization strategy. By attacking the appendages that allowed the whale to swim and escape, the Megalodon could disable prey that might otherwise be capable of fleeing or fighting back effectively. This immobilization-first approach to attacking large prey is seen in modern large predatory sharks and in some marine mammals, and its presence in the Megalodon's attack pattern suggests a behavioral sophistication appropriate to an apex predator that had been hunting large marine mammals for millions of years. The feast and fast feeding strategy implied by the Megalodon's caloric demands, large, widely spaced kills, rather than continuous small prey pursuit, shaped its relationship to the geographic distribution of prey. The highest concentrations of Megalodon teeth are found in coastal shelf and near-shelf deposits in tropical and subtropical latitudes. The regions where warm water and high marine productivity supported the largest concentrations of marine mammals during the Miocene. The teeth become progressively rarer in higher latitude deposits, consistent with a predator that could exploit cooler waters through partial endothermy but that was most abundant where the prey was most concentrated. The temporal distribution of the teeth, their abundance across the Miocene and into the Pliocene, and then their increasingly rapid disappearance as the Pliocene progressed, maps closely onto the changes in the marine mammal fauna that occurred as global temperatures dropped and the ocean's ecological structure shifted. The megalodon's relationship with its prey was not simply that of a hunter to its quarry. It was an ecological relationship, embedded in a food web of extraordinary complexity, maintained over millions of years of coevolution between predator and prey. The whales that the megalodon hunted had themselves evolved behaviors and morphologies that reduced their vulnerability, the development of high swimming speeds in some lineages, the evolution of coastal habitat preferences that may have reduced overlap with deep-water megalodon hunting ranges, the social behaviors that allowed some cetacean species to collectively defend against predators. These adaptations were, at least in part, shaped by predation pressure from the megalodon itself. The predator and its prey were evolving together, each influencing the other's trajectory over geological time. The megalodon was not simply a passive exploiter of an available resource. It was an active agent in the evolutionary dynamics of the Miocene and Pliocene ocean, shaping the fauna of its world as surely as it was shaped by it. Understanding that ecological embedding the megalodon's role, not just as an individual predator, but as a keystone element of an entire ocean ecosystem, is essential to understanding what happened when the megalodon began to disappear. Because the megalodon did not go extinct in isolation. It went extinct as part of a broader restructuring of the marine ecosystem, driven by forces that operated at the scale of the global climate over timescales that individual organisms could not perceive or respond to. What those forces were and how they interacted with the specific vulnerabilities of an animal with the megalodon's biology and ecological requirements is the territory that the next part of this story explores. The same biology that made the megalodon so effective in the Miocene also made it specifically vulnerable to what followed. An animal with enormous daily caloric needs, extensive nursery habitat requirements, and a reproductive strategy built around very large, widely spaced offspring is optimally suited to stable, prey-rich conditions and poorly suited to rapid ecological reorganization. The Miocene was stable and productive by the standards of geological time. The Pliocene, which followed it, was neither. The first signs of what was coming appeared in the geological record approximately 5 to 6 million years ago, near the end of the Miocene. Global temperatures began to decline, driven by changes in Earth's orbit, the closure of the Central American Seaway as North and South America moved toward each other, and the ongoing drawdown of atmospheric carbon dioxide that had been proceeding for millions of years. The cooling was not dramatic by the standards of subsequent geological periods. The full glacial cycles of the Pleistocene had not yet begun, but it was measurable and it was consequential. The ocean's thermal structure changed. The distribution of marine productivity shifted. The marine mammal fauna began to change in composition and abundance in ways that reflected the changing ecological conditions of the cooling ocean. For the megalodon, these changes represented a gradual but accelerating erosion of the ecological conditions that has supported its abundance for over 15 million years. The warm water marine mammal prey that had been abundant across broad swaths of the ocean began to concentrate in shrinking warm water refugia as the cooler waters expanded. The nursery habitats that had provided safe environments for juvenile megalodons in shallow, warm coastal waters became fewer and less reliable as coastal water temperatures dropped. The total productivity of the ocean system that supported the enormous prey biomass on which the megalodon depended began to reorganize in ways that favored species adapted to cooler, more dynamic conditions over species optimized for the warm, stable conditions of the Miocene. The megalodon, shaped by millions of years of evolution in those warm, stable conditions, was not among the beneficiaries of the reorganization. What the fossil record shows in the distribution and abundance of megalodon teeth across geological time is a species that was already in decline before the conditions reached the state that would ultimately be incompatible with its survival. The teeth become rarer in Pliocene deposits relative to their abundance in Miocene deposits. They disappear first from higher latitude sites, then from intermediate latitudes, contracting toward the tropical and subtropical refugia where the warm water conditions the megalodon required persisted longest. The contraction is visible in the record, traceable in the geographic distribution of specimens, and consistent with the species responding to deteriorating environmental conditions by withdrawing to the environments where those conditions remained most favorable. The timing of this contraction and its relationship to the changes in the marine mammal fauna occurring simultaneously suggests that prey decline was a significant driver of the megalodon's disappearance, alongside the direct effects of cooling on the megalodon's own physiology and habitat requirements. The large whale species that had dominated the Miocene marine mammal fauna were themselves changing during the Pliocene, some lineages declining, others shifting their distributions toward polar waters where cooling enhanced productivity through upwelling, others evolving toward the extreme gigantism that characterizes the largest modern whales. These changes reduced the availability of the large, warm-water cetacean prey that the megalodon had specialized in exploiting during its Miocene heyday, and they did so in the same geographic and temporal intervals where the megalodon's own distribution was contracting. And into this deteriorating environment, at some point during the Pliocene, came a new competitor, the great white shark. Carcharodon carcharias was not an ancient lineage. It was a relatively recent evolutionary development, emerging as a distinct species within the last few million years, and its geographic range and ecological role expanded during the same period that the megalodons was contracting. Whether the great white contributed directly to the megalodon's extinction through competition by exploiting the same prey populations that the megalodon depended on in the same habitats, at a time when those prey populations were already stressed, is debated. The great white is smaller than the megalodon and would not have been direct prey competition for the largest megalodon individuals. But the great white was also better adapted to the cooler, more productive waters that were expanding as the Pliocene progressed, and its smaller size meant lower absolute caloric requirements, even if its metabolic rate per unit body mass was comparable. In a deteriorating environment where the prey base was shrinking, a smaller predator with lower absolute food requirements has a fundamental advantage over a larger one with higher requirements. The great white may not have driven the megalodon to extinction, but it occupied an ecological space that the megalodon could no longer fully fill as the Miocene world disappeared. What is certain is that by approximately 3.6 million years ago, the megalodon was gone. Not everywhere at once, the fossil record suggests a gradual withdrawal from higher latitudes, followed by disappearance from the remaining refugia, but completely, with no credible evidence of survival beyond the Pliocene. The animal that had dominated the ocean's food web for over 15 million years, that had shaped the evolution of the marine mammals it preyed upon, that had been the largest apex predator in the history of the ocean, it was gone. The teeth remain, scattered across the world's marine sediments, waiting for collectors and researchers to find them. The animal that made them does not. The disappearance of the megalodon was not simply the loss of a species. It was the removal of the apex predator from a food web that had been organized around its presence for over 15 million years. The effects of that removal rippled through the marine ecosystem in ways that took millions of years to equilibrate. The prey species that the megalodon had been suppressing were no longer suppressed. The cetacean lineages that had evolved behaviors and morphologies specifically to reduce their vulnerability to megalodon predation now found those adaptations less critical. The ecological space that the megalodon had occupied, the role of the dominant, large prey specialist in the open ocean, was now vacant. And into that space, over the millions of years following the megalodon's extinction, the marine mammal fauna expanded. The baleen whales, freed from the predation pressure that had previously constrained their abundance and possibly their size, began the evolutionary trajectory toward the extreme gigantism that characterizes the largest species alive today. The blue whale, the largest animal that has ever lived, as far as the fossil record reveals, may owe its existence in part to the megalodon's extinction. This is not a paradox. It is an ecological consequence. The megalodon was an apex predator that suppressed the abundance of large marine mammals and likely influenced the evolutionary trajectories of the cetacean lineages it preyed upon. When the megalodon disappeared, those constraints were lifted. The prey species diversified and grew. The ocean that the megalodon had shaped for 15 million years began, slowly, to reshape itself around its absence. The animal whose teeth still wash up on beaches around the world, whose fossilized remains are found on every inhabited continent left behind, not just a fossil record, but an ecological legacy. The modern ocean, with its giant whales and its restructured food webs, is in part a product of what the megalodon was, and of what happened when it was no longer there. The Miocene was not a single ecological moment. It was a 20 million year interval during which the ocean's biological communities were continuously changing species, diversifying and going extinct, predator-prey relationships evolving, the distribution of productivity shifting as the continents moved and the climate varied. The megalodon lived through all of it. It was not a static entity persisting unchanged through the Miocene. It was a lineage undergoing continuous evolution, adapting to the changing conditions of a changing ocean. maintaining its ecological dominance not through inertia, but through ongoing biological adjustment to a world that was never standing still. The evidence for this continuous evolution comes from the teeth. Because megalodon teeth are found across such an enormous time span, from the early Miocene, roughly 23 million years ago, to the late Pliocene, approximately 3.5 million years ago, they provide a temporal record of the species' morphological change across its evolutionary lifespan. Teeth from the early Miocene differ subtly, but measurably from teeth of the middle Miocene, which differ in turn from teeth of the late Miocene and Pliocene. The differences involve the geometry of the serrations, the proportions of the tooth root, the degree of lateral curvature in the blade, and the size distribution of the dentition. These changes are not dramatic. The megalodon tooth is instantly recognizable throughout its entire stratigraphic range, but they are real, and they are consistent with a lineage that was not frozen in evolutionary time, but it was responding, as all species do, to the selective pressures of its changing environment. The chronological change in megalodon tooth morphology has been interpreted in various ways. One interpretation is that the changes reflect adaptation to shifting prey communities as the marine mammal fauna of the Miocene changed in composition. The mechanical demands on the megalodon's dentition changed as well, and the teeth evolved to optimize their function against the prey most commonly available at each point in time. Another interpretation is that the changes reflect the ongoing refinement of the megalodon's predatory mechanics as the lineage accumulated adaptive improvements over millions of years of selection. A third interpretation is that some of the apparent morphological change is geographic rather than temporal, that teeth from different regions represent regionally adapted populations of megalodon, and that the variation reflects adaptation to local prey and local conditions rather than a single global trend. All three interpretations may contain some truth, and none of them can be definitively confirmed or excluded with the available evidence. What the temporal distribution of teeth does allow is a reconstruction of the megalodon's population dynamics across its evolutionary lifespan, not in the quantitative sense that would require counting individual animals, but in the relative sense of comparing the abundance of teeth in deposits of different ages. By this measure, the megalodon was most abundant during the Miocene, with teeth occurring in great numbers in deposits of late Miocene age from tropical and subtropical coastlines around the world. The transition into the Pliocene is associated with a decline in tooth abundance, not an abrupt disappearance, but a gradual reduction in the number of teeth per unit of sediment from Pliocene deposits compared to Miocene deposits of equivalent depositional environments. And within the Pliocene, the pattern of decline accelerates. Teeth from the early Pliocene are more abundant than those from the middle Pliocene, which are more abundant than those from the late Pliocene, in a progressive pattern consistent with a species whose population was declining over several million years before its final disappearance. This pattern of gradual population decline over millions of years is important for several reasons. It means the megalodon's extinction was not a sudden event, not a catastrophic kill caused by a single identifiable disaster such as an asteroid impact or a volcanic supereruption. It was a drawn-out process, playing out over the multi-million-year timescales of ecological change and climate shift. Gradual extinction of this kind is the normal mode for large-bodied, long-lived species with slow reproductive rates. The type of extinction that occurs when an environment gradually becomes less suitable, when the prey base gradually declines, when the combination of stressors gradually exceeds the species' capacity for adjustment. It is, in a biological sense, death by 1,000 cuts rather than a single killing blow. The parallel between the megalodon's gradual decline and the situation of some large-bodied marine predators today is not one that biologists are comfortable drawing too explicitly. The timescales are enormously different, and the specific mechanisms are different, but it is also not one that can be entirely ignored. The general pattern of large apex predators with high caloric requirements and slow reproductive rates being vulnerable to ecosystem-level disruption appears in the fossil record and in the present simultaneously. The specific vulnerabilities that made the megalodon susceptible to the ecological changes of the Pliocene dependence on abundant large prey, sensitivity to habitat loss for nursery grounds, reproduction that produced few offspring are not unique to the megalodon. They are characteristics shared by many of the ocean's largest predators today. The nursery ground hypothesis for the megalodon has been explored in the context of several specific fossil sites. Among the most extensively studied are the late Miocene and early Pliocene deposits of the Calvert Cliffs in Maryland sediments exposed along the western shore of the Chesapeake Bay that represent the ancient seafloor of a warm, shallow sea that once covered the region. The Calvert Cliffs deposits contain an extraordinary concentration of megalodon teeth of varying sizes, including a high proportion of small teeth consistent with juveniles and subadults, alongside teeth of other shark species, cetacean bones, and other marine vertebrate remains. The presence of small teeth in concentrations that exceed what would be expected from a random sample of the age-size distribution of the megalodon population has been interpreted as evidence that the Calvert Cliffs area represented a nursery habitat, an environment where female megalodons preferentially gave birth and where juveniles concentrated during their early life stages. Similar concentrations of small megalodon teeth have been identified at other sites. The Bone Valley Formation in Florida, the late Miocene deposits of the Patagonian coast in Argentina, certain sites in the Mediterranean that were shallow coastal environments during the Miocene. Each of these sites shares characteristics consistent with the nursery hypothesis: shallow, warm water with high biological productivity, abundant smaller prey appropriate for juvenile predators, and relatively protected conditions compared to the open ocean where larger predators posed risks to juveniles not yet large enough to defend themselves. The geographic distribution of putative nursery sites across the megalodon's range, from the Atlantic coast of North America to South America to the Mediterranean, is consistent with a species that maintained nursery habitats across its entire geographic distribution, not just in a single region. The loss of nursery habitat during the Pliocene cooling would have been a particularly serious blow to a species with the megalodon's reproductive biology. If the megalodon produced few offspring per reproductive event, as is typical for large-bodied sharks with large neonatal size, and if those few offspring depended on specific warm, shallow coastal environments during their vulnerable juvenile stages, then the contraction of those environments as coastal waters cooled during the Pliocene would have directly reduced the reproductive success of the species. Each degree of coastal water cooling that made a former nursery site unsuitable represented a loss of reproductive capacity that the species could not easily compensate for, given its low reproductive rate. The combination of declining adult prey availability and declining reproductive success in a progressively contracting range of suitable nursery habitats created a compound vulnerability that the gradual but relentless cooling of the prey, Pliocene, exploited without mercy. The temporal mismatch between the megalodon's extinction and the great white shark's expansion into some of its former range has fueled the debate over the role of competition in the megalodon's demise. The timing of events is important here. The great white shark's ancestors were present in the ocean during the megalodon's reign. The two coexisted at some level for several million years. The great white did not suddenly appear in the wake of the megalodon's extinction and claim the vacant ecological space. The relationship between the two species during the period of the megalodon's decline is more complex. The great white was expanding its range and diversifying its prey base during the same period that the megalodon was contracting. But whether this expansion was cause or consequence of the megalodon's decline, or simply a parallel response to the same changing ecological conditions, is a question the fossil record cannot definitively answer. What the fossil record does show is that the transition from a Miocene ocean dominated by the megalodon to a Pliocene and Pleistocene ocean without it was not a transition to a simpler or less productive marine ecosystem. The ocean that emerged from the Pliocene cooling, with its expanded polar productivity, its restructured cetacean communities, its diversified shark fauna, and its progressive gigantism in baleen whales, was not impoverished by the megalodon's absence. It was reorganized around its absence. A different configuration of species occupying the apex predator roles, a different distribution of the energy that flows through the food web, a different ecological equilibrium. The megalodon's world is gone, along with the megalodon itself. What replaced it was not a diminished version of that world, but a genuinely different one that has been evolving for 3.5 million years since the last megalodon died, and that continues to evolve today. Science works with populations and geological time, with statistical patterns of tooth abundance across stratigraphic layers, not with individuals, but the individuals existed. They were born into a world that was, for the first generations of the decline, not obviously different from the world their parents had known. The water was slightly cooler, the prey slightly less abundant, the nursery habitats slightly smaller. None of these changes in any single generation would have been enough to signal catastrophe. The catastrophe was visible only across the sweep of geological time. This is the nature of extinction for species like the megalodon. Not dramatic, not sudden, not the subject of a single narrative moment. The last megalodon was born to parents who themselves had no way of knowing they were among the last. It grew, hunted, and died in an ocean that was quieter than the Miocene ocean of its ancestors, with fewer of its own kind, with prey that was harder to find, with nursery waters that were cooler than ideal. It left behind a tooth, or several teeth, that eventually settled into the marine sediment and began the long process of mineralization that would preserve them for 3.5 million years, until a collector on the beach or a researcher with a sampling device brought them back to the surface. It is one of the stranger facts about the Megalodon, stranger even than its size, stranger even than the revised reconstruction, that the animal whose fossilized remains are more widely distributed and more frequently found than almost any other extinct vertebrate left behind no living descendants, no ecological successors, no species that fills its precise niche. The Megalodon's role in the ocean ended with the Megalodon. The teeth outlasted the animal by millions of years. And the questions those teeth raise about what the animal was, how it lived, and why it disappeared have outlasted the teeth themselves, persisting in the scientific literature and the popular imagination long after the bones and cartilage are gone. Those questions have not all been answered. The 2025 study revised the body plan. The isotopic analysis clarified the physiology. The bite mark record illuminated the hunting behavior. The nursery site evidence constrained the reproductive biology. But the full picture of how the Megalodon experienced its own existence, what sensory world it inhabited, what social behaviors it engaged in, if any, whether it communicated, whether individuals recognized each other, how it navigated the vast distances of the open ocean, these things are not accessible from teeth and bite marks. They require soft tissue and behavior, neither of which fossilizes. The Megalodon's inner life, if it had one in any meaningful sense, is permanently beyond our reach. What we have is the architecture, the size, the shape, the chemistry, the traces left in bone. From those traces, science continues to build an ever more detailed picture of what the animal was. And every addition to that picture makes the absence of the animal itself more acutely felt, not as a loss in any sentimental sense, but as a gap in our understanding of what the ocean was and what it could be. The sensory biology of the Megalodon, the way it perceived and navigated its world, is a subject that can be partially inferred from the comparative anatomy of living sharks, particularly those that occupy broadly similar ecological roles as large open ocean predators. All sharks possess a sensory system that has no equivalent in any terrestrial vertebrate, the ampullae of Lorenzini, a network of electroreceptive organs concentrated in the snout that detect the weak electric fields generated by the muscle contractions of other animals. In sharks that rely on this system to locate prey in low visibility conditions, which is essentially all of them, the sensitivity can be extraordinary. Great white sharks have been documented detecting bioelectric fields at intensities of less than 1/1000th of a volt per centimeter. The Megalodon, as the apex predatory shark of its era, almost certainly possessed a highly developed electroreceptive system. In an open ocean with limited visibility, hunting prey that generated electric fields through the muscular contractions of swimming and cardiac activity, An electroreceptive predator of the megalodon's size would have had a detection range that exceeded anything achievable by vision or hearing alone. The lateral line system, a mechanosensory organ that detects pressure changes and water movements in the surrounding environment, would also have been significant. Sharks used the lateral line to detect the pressure waves generated by the swimming movements of other animals, allowing them to perceive prey, predators, and conspecifics through the water column at distances and in conditions where direct contact or chemical detection would not be possible. In large sharks, the lateral line is sensitive enough to detect the pressure signature of a large swimming animal at distances of many body lengths, which, in the case of an animal with a revised body length approaching 24 meters, would represent a detection range measured in hundreds of meters. The megalodon, hunting in the open ocean, with its electroreceptive and mechanosensory systems active, would have been aware of the presence and movement of large marine mammals at distances that precluded any element of surprise from the prey's perspective, unless the megalodon's approach was slow enough and its own bioelectric and pressure signature suppressed enough to remain below the prey's detection threshold until the strike. The chemical sense is the olfactory system that sharks use to detect dissolved chemicals in the water at extraordinary dilutions would have been the longest-range detection system available to the megalodon. The great white shark can detect blood in seawater at very low concentrations and follow chemical gradients to their source over distances of hundreds of meters. The megalodon would have had a comparable or superior chemical detection capability, one that could locate an injured or dying cetacean at great distance, follow the dispersing chemical plume of a recent kill, or detect whale aggregations through the chemical signatures of their biological activity in the water column. What the megalodon's sensory world would have felt like to an organism inhabiting it is, of course, not something that paleontology can address. But the reconstruction of those sensory systems from comparative anatomy suggests an animal with an awareness of its environment that extended far beyond the limits of vision. An animal that perceived the ocean not primarily as a visual scene, but as a complex three-dimensional field of chemical, electrical, and pressure information, updated continuously as the megalodon moved through water that was itself in constant motion. This kind of sensing is alien to human experience. It is closer to what an electromagnetic field detector might perceive than to what human eyes and ears perceive. And it is the sensory reality in which the megalodon spent its entire existence navigating, hunting, reproducing, and eventually dying in an ocean it experienced in ways that no human mind can fully reconstruct. The question of whether the megalodon is still alive is not a scientific question. It is a cultural one, a question that says more about human psychology and the appetite for the unknown than it does about paleontology or marine biology. Science answered it definitively decades ago, and the answer has not changed. The megalodon is extinct. It has been extinct for approximately 3.6 million years, and there is no credible evidence of its survival into the modern ocean. The question persists, not because the evidence is ambiguous, but because people want it to persist, because the idea of an apex predator of the megalodon scale, still swimming in the unexplored depths of the ocean, is narratively compelling in a way that no amount of negative evidence can fully dispel. The argument for megalodon survival typically takes one of several forms, all of which are superficially plausible and none of which survive contact with what is actually known about the animal and the ocean. The most common version appeals to the vastness and unexplored character of the deep ocean. If 75% of the ocean floor has never been seen, how can we be sure the megalodon is not hiding there? This argument conflates the size of the unexplored ocean with the probability of a large animal going undetected within it. The deep ocean is vast, but it is not sealed. Its surface is traversed daily by thousands of ships. Its shallower waters are fished by commercial fishing operations that cover every major ocean basin. Its midwater layers are sampled by research expeditions. A living megalodon, or a population of living megalodons large enough to sustain the species, could not interact with the ocean's food web as it necessarily would, given its enormous caloric requirements, without leaving evidence. The absence of that evidence is not the same as the presence of the megalodon. The specific forms of evidence that would be expected if megalodon were alive are worth enumerating, because their absence is not trivial. A living megalodon would need to eat. At its estimated metabolic rate, it would need to consume the equivalent of roughly 10,000 kilograms of marine mammal flesh per week, a consumption rate that would leave unmistakable evidence in the form of partially consumed carcasses of large marine mammals, washing ashore, found by fishing vessels, or detected by acoustic monitoring systems that now cover most of the world's major oceans. Modern whale carcasses are tracked by researchers studying deep-sea scavenger communities and the flow of energy through ocean food webs. A megalodon kill of a large cetacean would produce a carcass of extraordinary nutritional content, attracting scavengers from kilometers in every direction and generating an acoustic and chemical signature detectable by the various monitoring systems now deployed in the ocean. None of this has been observed. Not once. Not anywhere. Not in a century of increasingly comprehensive global ocean surveillance. A living megalodon would also need to breathe not in the mammalian sense, but in the sense that a large, active, partially endothermic shark needs to pass enormous volumes of water over its gill surfaces to extract sufficient oxygen for its metabolic demands. This requires continuous movement. A megalodon cannot stop swimming for extended periods without compromising its oxygen supply. It would therefore be moving through the water column, continuously generating pressure waves detectable by hydrophone networks, occasionally approaching the surface, occasionally appearing in the sonar returns of commercial fishing and research vessels that now cover the ocean with a density of acoustic monitoring that did not exist 50 years ago. The acoustic signature of a 30-meter shark moving at a speed through the water column is not subtle. It has not been detected. The teeth are perhaps the most telling absence. Megalodon shed its teeth continuously throughout its life, as all sharks do, with each tooth eventually being replaced by a new one from the row behind it, and the shed tooth falling to the ocean floor. The rate of tooth shedding in sharks varies by species and age, but is generally in the range of 1 to several teeth per week for active predators. A population of living megalodons would be shedding teeth into the ocean floor continuously. Those teeth, once shed, do not dissolve. They mineralize and persist in the sediment exactly as the teeth from the Miocene and Pliocene do. Deep-sea sediment cores, which are retrieved by research vessels from all major ocean basins, sample the layers of material that have accumulated on the ocean floor over thousands and millions of years. The youngest megalodon teeth in the sediment record date to approximately 3.6 million years ago. If Megalodon were alive, teeth from the past million years, the past 100,000 years, the past 1,000 years would be present in modern sediment layers. They are not. The tooth record is the most direct and unambiguous evidence available. The Megalodon stopped shedding teeth 3.5 million years ago, because 3.5 million years ago there were no more megalodons to shed them. The claim sometimes made in popular media that megalodon teeth have been found in sediment layers that indicate a much more recent age has been examined and refuted. The specific cases typically cited involve teeth found in sediment that was incorrectly dated due to sediment disturbance, bioturbation, or misinterpretation of the stratigraphy. In each case where the dating methodology has been scrutinized carefully, the teeth have been shown to derive from older sediment layers that were mixed with younger material by the physical processes of the ocean floor. There are no credible, peer-reviewed reports of megalodon teeth from sediment younger than the Pliocene. The absence is not an oversight. It is a comprehensive, replicated, globally distributed finding that is consistent only with the interpretation that the megalodon ceased to exist in the Pliocene, every ocean basin, every sediment core, every deep-sea survey. The same answer, repeated without exception, across a century of marine geological research. The megalodon's teeth stopped falling to the ocean floor approximately 3.5 million years ago. What the megalodon's absence from the modern ocean does not mean is that the modern ocean is a less interesting place. The ocean that exists today without the megalodon, without Livyatan, without the diverse megafauna of the Miocene, contains biological communities of extraordinary complexity, diversity, and in some cases scale that rival or exceed what the Miocene ocean offered in its own terms. The blue whale that the megalodon may have indirectly enabled by removing the predation pressure that constrained the earlier evolution of baleen whale gigantism is itself one of the most remarkable animals that has ever existed, larger than the megalodon by most estimates, and still alive in the modern ocean in small but recoverable numbers. The great white shark that survived the transition from the Miocene to the modern ocean is itself an extraordinary predator, poorly understood in many aspects of its biology, still capable of surprising researchers who have been studying it for decades. The deep ocean that the megalodon argument appeals to the vast, poorly explored depths that might harbor anything is not a refuge for extinct species. It is something stranger and in some ways more interesting, an environment that has been shaped by millions of years of evolution under conditions unlike those of the surface world, home to organisms that are genuinely as alien to surface biology as anything the imagination might supply, waiting not to be rediscovered, but to be discovered for the first time. The Megalodon is not in the deep ocean. But things that are genuinely as strange as a megalodon, things that have never appeared in a Hollywood film because they have never been seen by any eye, are there. That is a more interesting truth than the survival of an extinct shark. But it is a truth that requires accepting the loss of the megalodon as final, as real, and as irreversible. The popular fascination with megalodon survival is ultimately a symptom of the same impulse that drives genuine interest in the animal, the sense that the ocean harbors things we have not yet understood, that its history contains chapters we have not yet read, that the line between what is known and what is unknown runs through the water in ways that are still being mapped. That impulse is correct. The ocean is full of things we do not understand. The megalodon is not one of them. It is one of the things we are slowly coming to understand. One revised reconstruction and one isotopic analysis and one bite mark study at a time. But the ocean around it, the ocean that shaped it and outlasted it, the ocean whose biological communities are still feeling the effects of its disappearance 3.5 million years later, that ocean remains incompletely known. And in that incompleteness, there is enough genuine mystery to sustain any amount of curiosity without needing to resurrect an animal that the evidence tells us clearly and repeatedly is gone. The fictional megalodon, the one in the films, the one that survives in a thermal vent system at the bottom of the Pacific, the one discovered by a lone submersible crew in a blocked-off section of the deep ocean, says something interesting about the human relationship to large predators and to the unknown. The standard narrative of megalodon survival fiction involves a geographic isolation explanation. The animal has been cut off from the main ocean by some physical barrier and has survived in a hidden pocket of the deep, unknown to science. The thermal vent isolation scenario, which appeared most prominently in the 2018 film The Meg and the novel that preceded it, requires believing that a population of megalodon-scale predators has been hiding below a thermocline layer in the Mariana Trench, consuming an entirely hidden food web of large marine animals that also left no trace in the sediment record, without any individual ever breaching the thermocline and being detected. The impossibility of this scenario, from a biological and physical oceanography perspective, is complete. But its persistence in fiction is not simply ignorance. It reflects a genuine emotional need, the need for the ocean to still contain something overwhelming, something that defies the encroachment of complete knowledge, something that reminds the human imagination that the world is larger than what has been catalogued. The need is understandable. It is also, in a strictly empirical sense, unnecessary. The megalodon does not need to be alive for the ocean to be overwhelming. The deep ocean is already full of organisms that dwarf the imagination, organisms that are alive, documented, and still only partially understood. The Greenland shark, which may live for over 400 years and cruises the deep, cold waters of the Arctic and North Atlantic, is older than the United States. The colossal squid, which can reach up to around 10 meters in length and has the largest eyes of any animal on Earth, has never been observed alive in its natural habitat by a human researcher. The oarfish, which can exceed 11 meters in length and inspired the legends of sea serpents in every seafaring culture, is still so rarely seen that researchers do not know whether it is solitary or social, how it reproduces, or what its full geographic range is. These animals are real. They are alive. They are in the ocean right now. None of them require the revival of an extinct species to make the ocean feel vast and unknowable. The megalodon's legacy in the modern ocean is not a living animal. It is a distributed archive of fossilized teeth, a set of revised scientific understandings, an ongoing program of paleontological research, and an ecological history whose consequences are still visible in the biological communities of the present ocean. That legacy is not diminished by the animal's extinction. In some ways, it is amplified by it. The teeth are more accessible to researchers than a living megalodon would be. The science of reconstructing the animal from those teeth is more technically sophisticated than anything that could be applied to a living specimen. And the questions raised by the megalodon's existence and disappearance illuminate aspects of deep-sea ecology, climate-driven extinction, and evolutionary biology that no living megalodon population could answer by its mere existence. The megalodon in extinction is, paradoxically, more scientifically productive than the megalodon alive would be. The specific contribution of the megalodon to science is not finished. The 2025 revision of its body plan will generate years of follow-on research as the implications of the new reconstruction are worked through for every aspect of megalodon biology that was previously inferred from the old. 1. The isotopic analysis of megalodon teeth, which have already revealed partial endothermy and dietary flexibility, are continuing with improved techniques that will extract additional chemical information from the enamel information about the temperature of the water the animal swam in, about the specific prey species it consumed, about the ontogenetic changes in its diet as it grew from neonate to adult. The nursery site research, which has identified putative nursery habitats on multiple continents, is being expanded to include quantitative analysis of the size distribution of teeth from these sites in comparison with the size distributions predicted by various reproductive biology models. Each of these research programs will produce results in the coming years that further refine the picture of what the megalodon was. And the megalodon, 3.5 million years dead, continues to generate new knowledge, tooth by tooth, paper by paper, question by answered question. The ocean that the megalodon inhabited for 20 million years is not the ocean of today. The Miocene Sea that stretched across the site of the current Mediterranean, the warm coastal shallows that served as megalodon nurseries from Maryland to Patagonia, the open ocean environments where Livyatan and Megalodon competed for the same large cetacean prey. All of these environments have been transformed beyond recognition by the geological and climatic changes of the past 5 million years. The coastlines have shifted. The sea levels have risen and fallen through multiple glacial cycles. The marine mammal communities that constituted the megalodon's prey base have been restructured by the same cooling that ended the megalodon's tenure. The megalodon lived in one configuration of the ocean, was shaped by that configuration, and disappeared when it changed. The study of the megalodon is, among other things, a study of how an ocean ecosystem responds to the loss of its apex predator. The Pliocene ocean reorganized around the Megalodon's absence over millions of years. The Megalodon's extinction is a documented example of how the loss of an apex predator propagates through an ecosystem and reshapes it over time. Apex predators matter to the ecosystems they inhabit. Their absence matters too. The Megalodon's fossilized teeth are among the evidence for that claim. Evidence assembled over 3.5 million years of lying in the sediment, waiting to be found and understood. What the next chapter of Megalodon research will reveal is not predictable in its specifics, but its general direction is clear, toward a more complete and more accurate picture of an animal that has been misunderstood for nearly 2 centuries, and toward a deeper understanding of the Miocene ocean ecosystem that it dominated and helped to shape. The 2025 revision of the body plan was a landmark, but it was not the last word. The science continues. And the teeth, still washing out of marine sediments on beaches around the world, still being recovered from sediment cores drilled by research vessels, still being discovered in collections that have not been fully analyzed, those teeth still have things to say. The Megalodon is still telling its story, one fossil at a time. And what it is saying about size and extinction and ecology and the deep history of the ocean is a story that belongs not just to paleontology, but to the present. Because the ocean the Megalodon inhabited is the same ocean that covers this planet today, changed beyond recognition in its biology, but continuous in its physics and its chemistry and its geological identity. What the Megalodon tells us about what the ocean was is inseparable from what it tells us about what the ocean might become. That connection between the deep past of a vanished predator and the immediate present of a rapidly changing ocean is what the final part of the story explores. The Megalodon tooth is one of the most widely distributed fossil objects in the world. It washes out of marine sediments on beaches from the Carolinas to Morocco to Australia. It is collected by children on school trips and by professional paleontologists with research grants and by recreational fossil hunters with metal detectors. It sits in museum cases on every inhabited continent. It is bought and sold in rock shops and auction houses. It is given as gifts, mounted on walls, photographed for social media, held in the hands of people who have never heard of Odontidae and who may not be able to spell Miocene, but who know, intuitively, that they are holding something extraordinary. The tooth of an animal that was real, that was enormous, and that is gone. This accessibility is unusual for a large Cenozoic predator. The bones of Tyrannosaurus rex are rare, fiercely protected when found, concentrated in specific geological formations in specific regions of the world. The bones of Livyatan melvillei are found at only a handful of sites. The Megalodon's teeth are everywhere because the animal existed in such numbers, across such a vast geographic range, for such an enormous span of time, that the accumulated dental record of 20 million years of shedding covers the ocean floor in a layer of material that erosion is continuously exposing. The Megalodon was, in a sense, always leaving behind its teeth. It has been doing so for 20 million years, and it has been dead for 3.5 million of them. The democratization of Megalodon fossil material has had consequences for the science. Because teeth are so commonly available, they have been studied extensively in greater morphological detail by more researchers with more analytical tools than the remains of almost any other large extinct predator. The body of literature on Megalodon teeth is vast and growing. Morphometric analyses, isotopic studies, histological examinations of internal tooth structure, comparisons across geographic regions and geological time intervals, reconstructions of tooth developmental biology from the incremental growth structures preserved in the dentine. Each tooth contains more information than a casual examination suggests, and the techniques for extracting that information have improved dramatically over the past 2 decades. The 2025 body plan revision was, in this sense, a consequence of the accumulation of exactly this kind of detailed tooth data, combined with the development of comprehensive databases of shark morphology that made the comparative analysis across 165 species possible. The study was not the product of a single dramatic discovery. No new Megalodon skeleton, no previously unknown fossil site, no revolutionary new technique applied to a single tooth. It was the product of systematic, patient, cumulative science, the assembly of a large data set, the application of rigorous comparative methods, and the willingness to ask whether the foundational assumptions of a well-established reconstruction were justified. The answer they were not was available in the data for years before anyone asked a question in precisely the right way. This is how paleontological revisions typically work. They do not usually arrive as single dramatic discoveries, though dramatic discoveries do occur. More often, they arrive as the gradual accumulation of evidence that eventually reaches a tipping point, a point at which the existing model can no longer accommodate the data without straining, and a new model is required to make sense of what has been collected. The Megalodon's body plan revision reached that tipping point in 2025. The extinction timing may reach a similar tipping point as additional sediment core data becomes available and the stratigraphic range of the youngest Megalodon teeth is more precisely constrained. The ecological role of the Megalodon in the Miocene food web will be revised as the bite mark record from more sites is analyzed, and as the isotopic record of co-occurring cetacean fossils is examined for evidence of the selection pressure that Megalodon predation imposed on cetacean evolution. The science is not finished. It never is. What the Megalodon's story offers, beyond its specific content, is a model for how to think about the deep history of the ocean. The ocean is not a static backdrop to the history of life. It is an active participant in that history, changing in temperature, in chemistry, in circulation, in the distribution of its biological communities, in ways that have repeatedly transformed the conditions of life on this planet. The Megalodon's 20 million year tenure in the ocean was made possible by a specific configuration of those conditions. Its extinction was caused by a change in those conditions that exceeded the Megalodon's capacity for adaptive response. The story of the Megalodon is, at its core, a story about the relationship between a species and the environment that sustains it, and about what happens when that relationship is disrupted faster than evolution can respond. The modern study of extinct apex predators, like the Megalodon, is not primarily motivated by nostalgia or by the appeal of large, dangerous animals. Though those motivations exist and are not without value in sustaining public interest in paleontology, it is motivated by the recognition that the fossil record of apex predators is a record of how ecosystems have responded to climatic and environmental change across geological time. The Megalodon's extinction is one data point in that record. The extinction of the Irish elk, the cave lion, the short-faced bear, the giant ground sloths of the Americas, each of these is another data point, each representing a large-bodied apex consumer that was lost in the transitions between geological epochs, each leaving behind an ecosystem that reorganized around its absence. The patterns that emerge from those data points about which types of species are most vulnerable to environmental change, about how quickly ecosystems reorganize, about what the downstream effects of apex predator loss look like across different types of ecosystems, are patterns that have direct relevance to the management of biodiversity in the present. The Megalodon is not manageable. It is 3.5 million years dead, but the principles its extinction illustrates about the relationship between body size, caloric requirements, reproductive rates, and vulnerability to rapid environmental change apply to the large predators that are alive today and that are themselves under various forms of pressure from habitat loss, prey depletion, and climate change. The great white shark, the Megalodon's distant ecological successor, has declined in abundance across much of its former range. The whale shark, the largest fish alive today, is classified as endangered. The tiger shark, the bull shark, the oceanic whitetip, all declining, all subject to the same kinds of pressures that, on geological timescales, produced the Pliocene extinctions, of which the Megalodon's disappearance was the most dramatic example. The science of understanding why the Megalodon went extinct is, in part, the science of understanding what large apex predators need to survive and what happens when they do not get it. The teeth that wash up on beaches are not the Megalodon's gift to us. They are its record, preserved by the same geological processes that preserve all fossils, indifferent to any human interest in their significance. But they have become, in practice, a point of contact between the human present and the oceanic past, a place where the history of the ocean becomes tangible, portable, available for examination by hands that are separated from the animal that produced them by 3.5 million years of geological time. That contact is not nothing. It is a form of engagement with deep time that is available to almost anyone willing to look for it on the right beach, in the right sediment layer, at the right point in the erosion cycle of the right marine formation. The Megalodon will not be resurrected. Its genome is not preserved. DNA does not survive in marine sediment for 3.5 million years, and the teeth contain no soft tissue from which it could be recovered. The animal is gone in every biological sense. What remains is the teeth, the bite marks on whale bones, the isotopic signatures in fossilized enamel, and the science that has extracted from these materials a picture of an animal that is, after 200 years of misidentification, finally coming into focus. Not the scaled-up great white of the museum displays, not the barrel-chested monster of the films. Something more elongated, more nuanced, more biologically interesting than any of those representations, an animal shaped by 20 million years of evolution in a warm Miocene ocean, adapted to a specific prey base and a specific ecological context, and lost when that context changed beyond the capacity of its biology to follow. The ocean remembers the megalodon in the teeth, in the reshaped whale lineages, in the blue whale's improbable gigantism, in the restructured food webs of a Pliocene ocean that had to reorganize around the absence of its largest predator. The ocean does not mourn. It does not remember in any meaningful sense. It simply continues as it has continued through every extinction and every reorganization of its biological communities for 4 billion years. The Megalodon is one chapter in that continuation. An extraordinary chapter, a recently revised chapter, a chapter with more text still to be uncovered from the sediment and the enamel and the bone. But a closed chapter in the one sense that matters most. The animal is gone, and its return is not possible. What is possible is understanding. And understanding, one tooth at a time, is what the science of the Megalodon has been building toward since the first naturalist looked at one of these teeth and asked what kind of animal could have made it. That story has obvious relevance to the present. Not because the present situation is identical to the Pliocene, it is not, in ways that matter, but because the underlying dynamics are the same. Ecosystems are configured around the species that compose them. Apex predators structure the communities below them in the food web, influencing the abundance and behavior of their prey and the cascade of effects that those prey have on the species below them. The loss of an apex predator reorganizes the ecosystem, not always catastrophically, not always irreversibly, but always substantially. The Pliocene ocean reorganized around the megalodon's absence over millions of years. The modern ocean is reorganizing far faster around the human-caused changes now being imposed on it. The specifics are different. The biology is the same. The megalodon's relationship to the modern ocean extends further than its ecological legacy. Its teeth, washing up on beaches around the world, are a physical connection to the deep past of the ocean that most of the ocean's history does not offer. The ocean is an environment that destroys most of what has ever lived in it. Soft tissues decompose, shells dissolve in acidic deep-sea water. Even bones are processed by the biological and chemical machinery of the seafloor into components that return to the ocean's chemical cycles without leaving a trace. The megalodon's teeth survive because they are dense, highly mineralized structures that resist dissolution in all but the most corrosive environments. They are among the few physical objects that the Miocene ocean has directly delivered to the modern world, unchanged in their essential structure after tens of millions of years in the sediment. Holding a megalodon tooth is, in a literal sense, holding something that was part of the Miocene ocean that was formed in the mouth of an animal swimming through water whose temperature and chemistry and circulation have all since changed. In a world where the continents were in different positions, where the ice caps were absent or reduced, where the marine mammal fauna that now fills the ocean did not yet exist in its current form. The tooth is unchanged. Everything around it has changed. This is the nature of fossils. Objects formed in a past world that survive into a present that has left their world behind. And the Megalodon's teeth, more accessible and more widely distributed than almost any other fossil object of comparable age, offer that encounter with the deep past to an unusually broad constituency of people, scientists and collectors, and children and casual beachcombers alike. The science of the Megalodon will continue to produce revisions, refinements, and occasional overturnings of established understanding. The 2025 revision is unlikely to be the last major change to the picture of what the Megalodon was. As analytical techniques improve, as more teeth are sampled from more localities and geological intervals, as the comparative dataset of living shark morphology is expanded and refined, the reconstruction will be adjusted. This is not a weakness of the science, it is its strength. The willingness to revise is what allows the picture to approach accuracy over time, even if it never reaches completeness. The Megalodon that existed, the actual animal, swimming through the actual Miocene ocean, hunting actual whales in actual water, was a specific thing with a specific biology. The science of reconstructing it is an asymptotic approach to that specificity, getting closer with each new study, never quite arriving, always more accurate than it was. 3.5 million years after the last Megalodon died, the teeth are still in the sediment. The ocean that the Megalodon shaped is still here, changed but continuous. The questions the Megalodon raises about what makes an apex predator, about what it means for one to disappear, about what the ocean was and what it is becoming, are still open, still productive, still generating research and argument and revision. The Megalodon is gone. Its story is not. The Miocene ocean that the Megalodon dominated is gone too, gone as completely as the Megalodon itself, replaced by the Pliocene and then the Pleistocene and then the Holocene configurations that the ocean has passed through on its way to the present. Each of those configurations was shaped by the biological communities of the previous one. The Pliocene ocean was shaped by the Miocene. The modern ocean was shaped by the Pliocene and the Pleistocene. And the modern ocean is currently being reshaped by the activities of a species that has existed for a geological instant compared to the Megalodon's 20 million year tenure. But that is changing the conditions of the ocean, its temperature, its chemistry, its circulation, at a pace that has no precedent in the geological record of the past several million years. The Megalodon faced a changing ocean and lost. It was not a failure of biology. The Megalodon's biology was extraordinary, finely tuned to the conditions of the Miocene, capable of sustaining an apex predator across a global range for longer than the entire history of the human genus. What defeated it was the pace and magnitude of environmental change relative to the pace of evolutionary adaptation. Evolution is slow. Climate change, whether geological or anthropogenic, can be fast. When they are mismatched, the result is extinction not because the species was weak, but because the change was faster than the biology could follow. This is the Megalodon's final lesson, if it has one, that the ocean's history is a record of change, of adaptation, of extinction, and of reorganization around the losses. It has survived everything that has been thrown at it over 4 billion years of Earth history. The Permian extinction, which killed over 90% of marine species, reorganized the ocean but did not end it. The end Cretaceous extinction, which ended the Megalodon's distant ancestors' era of dominance, along with the non-avian dinosaurs, reorganized the ocean but did not end it. The Megalodon's own extinction reorganized the ocean but did not end it. The ocean continues. What it contains, what species inhabit it, in what abundances, in what configurations, is what changes. And those changes are the product of the physical and chemical conditions that the ocean experiences, and of the biological responses to those conditions that evolution produces over the timescales available to it. What the Megalodon's teeth, washed clean by 3.5 million years of sediment and seawater, have to say about all of this is not a sermon. It is a datum, a point in the record of what the ocean has been, and what has lived in it, and what conditions that life required, and what happened when those conditions changed. The Megalodon is one point among millions in that record, a vivid one, an accessible one, a recently revised one, but it is embedded in a record that extends far before and far after it, and that is still being written, and that will continue to be written long after the last human being who ever looked at a Megalodon tooth has ceased to exist. The ocean is patient, the record is long, and the teeth are still in the sediment. If this journey moved something in you, consider subscribing to Sleep on Deep. Every week, we descend a little further. The ocean is waiting.